This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Emerging market shares tracked a global downturn in sentiment today. They were fueled by a rise in COVID-19 infections in some regions. Now, MSCI's index of emerging market shares fell about 0.8% on the day. South Africa's JSE, on the other hand, saw shares extending losses to day 5. The old share did close in the green, but it was little changed on the day. Now, locally, investor sentiment has also taken a hit from new mining data, which of course shows that a strict lockdown has crippled output, especially in April. Also, manufacturing data showed the sector was in bad shape even before the lockdown. Now, also coming up on today's show, we take a look at Kenya's new budget along with some controversial tax plans. The UK's economy shrinks by a record 20% in April. And Nollywood is back in the game weeks after a nationwide lockdown in Nigeria. Well, let's start off in South Africa. The country's property market is on the rebound after being halted during level 5 of the lockdown. Now, deals slowed down significantly with restrictions while the country tried to come to grips with COVID-19. As commission earners, estate agents have had no help from the government, but they're starting to pick up the pieces. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with more.
The first 6 weeks of South Africa's lockdown was a trying time for the real estate sector. Homes could not be bought or sold, and rental deals were all placed on hold.
And we weren't allowed to take people out to go and have a look at properties. And it was only from the 8th of May when people were actually allowed to move. To not earn income for 6-8 weeks was quite devastating. So we are very happy to be back at work. In that time that we were in the hard lockdown, we weren't able to hand over any properties that had been signed from before the lockdown.
Estate agents stayed in contact with prospective clients from home via phone and emails. Leapfrog's Tanya Naidu managed to ink a virtual contract before restrictions were eased.
We'd send them just videos and say, this is what the property is. We'd go through what the spaces looks like, and I actually had closed the deal. We did it via a video chat with the principal of the company, so it was a 3-way chat, and yeah, it was great. We actually did that.
As the market picks up, big spenders are holding back. The first-time buyers on the hunt for bargains are taking advantage of interest rates at almost 50-year lows.
The areas that I deal with is not far from the townships. A lot of them are coming from there, and that's exciting for me. I'm getting calls and I'm saying, but some of the people are saying, my house is small. I can't do everything I need to do. I need to, cook. I need to work. I need to make sure the kids are seen to, as in homeschooling. I need a better space. The kids need to run around.
COVID-19 has, however, changed the business environment. Virtual showrooms are becoming more popular and viewing procedures have been tightened.
There's a procedure form that we send through before we take them out to view. That's basically shows what the procedure needs to be at the viewing. So no touching of surfaces, move through as quickly as possible, sort of one person at a time, and to make the viewing sort of as quick as possible without sort of detracting from their experience.
Despite the lockdown, property still remains a viable investment in South Africa, but a recovery depends on how quickly restrictions are lifted. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's head to Kenya now, where Treasury Secretary Ukur Yatani presented his $25 billion budget for the year starting July 1st. Now, all eyes were on Yatani's first budget and how he will balance the state's financial plan against shrinking revenues, closing businesses in the country, job losses, and of course, declining exports. Here are some of the highlights from his budget. This budget includes a stimulus package to jumpstart the economy. It also proposed a further removal of tax exemptions. Yatani imposed a 1% minimum tax on revenues for all companies. He says he's targeting firms that repeatedly declare losses in order to run away from taxes. Also, online transactions will now attract a 1.5% digital tax as the government goes after growing e-commerce companies in the country. Kenya will turn largely to local loans to fund this budget deficit. Yatani said the government is now targeting a fiscal deficit of 8.3% of GDP in the financial year 2019 and 2020, and that's from the previous figure of 6.3% of GDP. Now, I spoke to Nikhil Hira, he's a tax director of Bowman's Law, about his impressions of this year's budget.
The government has got a lot of debt. Revenue collections are going down because people are not at work. The pandemic is creating havoc, not just in Kenya, but all over the world. But what really surprised me was that there was nothing necessarily new in this budget. A lot of it we'd heard before: increased poverty, increased unemployment, infrastructure needs development, decent housing required. All these things we've heard before, and we don't really have a solution yet of how we're going to deal with them. And I don't think his budget actually gave us that solution at all. So it was a sense of deja vu, like, I've heard this before, I'm looking for the solutions, but I'm not really getting them here.
But for you, who are some of the biggest winners and losers in this budget in terms of sectors in the economy?
Well, I guess the biggest winners, although not really coming from the budget, it came from before the budget. The biggest winners are all taxpayers because tax rates have been reduced as part of the COVID-19 stimulus package. The issue, of course, with reducing tax rates at a time when people are out of work or businesses don't have business is that you really end up, not really benefiting from it. But it's going to be a great assistance when we get to the end of this pandemic, which I'm sure we will at some stage, and we get that kickstart to the economy. I don't think enough was necessarily done for, say, sectors like tourism. To me, they were losers. They have been losers for the last 3 months, and they're going to be for the rest of the year because no one's going to come to Kenya. No one's going to go anywhere, really. It's, flying and holidaying and what have you is going to be quite difficult.
Well, one of the more controversial elements of this budget is, of course, the introduction of a digital services tax at a rate of about 1.5% on the gross transaction value. This, of course, isn't the first proposal to tax digital services. Walk us through the history of how Kenya has tried and certainly failed to impose taxes on these services so far.
It really started with the VAT Act 2013, which introduced this concept of services, electronic services that you download for use in Kenya, use or consumption in Kenya. And they said, well, those have got to be subject to VAT. The provider has got to register for VAT, account for VAT, whether it's B2B or B2C. And if they don't have a presence in Kenya, then they can appoint a representative to do it. Now, at the time, this was 2013, when folks tried to register for this, it became a stumbling block because the KRA system was such that they didn't actually allow you to register for something unless you had a registered presence in the country, so a branch or a legal entity, a company or something like that, which rather defeated the whole purpose of the legislation. The next big thing that happened was last year in Budget 2019, when they introduced the concept of this digital marketplace, both for income tax and for VAT. So they were going to tax the transactions in a digital marketplace, and the digital marketplace was defined as a place where effectively buyer meets seller. The question then is, well, who's paying this tax? Who is it targeted at? and where does it go next? One of the things that was in the law, because it has been enacted, was that it won't really come into force until the CS for Cabinet Secretary for ICT actually issues regulations, and those weren't forthcoming until about 2 weeks ago. So they're out, they go to the parliamentary process and there. But then in the finance bill, we have this digital service tax that you just referred to, 1.5% on the value of the transaction. Again, who are they aiming this at? How are they going to enforce it? How are they going to collect it? It's just a complete sense of confusion in all this. But to be fair to Kenya, this is the same confusion that most parts of the world have. And even the OECD has said, look, don't do it unilaterally. Let's come up with a global framework of how we tax digital transactions and the whole digital area. But I guess in a time when the government is desperate for funds, they were looking for any tax that they could to add to the revenue take. I'm not convinced that this is actually going to give them as much as they think it is.
Yeah, well, that will be interesting to watch. But let's shift focus now. Now, the finance minister is also asking legislators to approve the idea of introducing a 1% minimum tax, which, of course, is going to target firms that the finance minister says regularly declare losses that are, in quotes, artificial at best. What are your thoughts on that?
Let's have a look at why someone would be in losses. It may not be that they're in accounting losses. They could very well be in accounting profits. But as part of the incentive to bring them in, to make them invest in, say, manufacturing facilities around the country, the law used to give them an investment deduction, which could have been as much as 150% of the cost of their investment. So in year one, when you brought your investment into use, you got this deduction of 150% of what you spent, and that was a tax loss. And that tax loss, I mean, if you look at a big power project, big numbers we're talking about here, they get 150%. They're unlikely to be making a profit for a number of years for tax purposes because of these carried forward losses. So what they're doing here is that what they've introduced is they said, okay, we want a minimum tax. It won't apply to employees. It won't apply if you're paying residential rental tax. But my next question is, if I'm an insurance company, there is a specified basis of taxation. Is the minimum tax going to apply to that? So again, we've introduced legislation without really thinking it through. Now, Tanzania has got a minimum tax, by the way, but in their case, they say if in the current year you have losses and in the preceding 2 years you have losses, then you must pay this minimum tax based on turnover. But ours seem to be completely open, and everyone is going to be subject to it, including the people who are making not necessarily artificial losses, actual losses. And I think that's going to be a problem.
Well, let's now turn our attention to some corporate headlines today. 6 Kenyan banks have joined the Affordable Housing Program as strategic partners. They're committing over $3 billion in mortgages. Now, the financiers include Equity Bank, Kenya Commercial Bank, NCBA, Stanbic Bank, ABSA, and Housing Finance. The AHP is the first comprehensive initiative in which the state seeks to use private sector funding to facilitate provision of homes to its citizens. And mining firm Harmony Gold has secured approval to raise about $200 million to partly fund the company's acquisition of Anglo Gold Ashanti's South African business. Now, Harmony now awaits for approval from the government for the transfer of mineral rights from Anglo Gold in order to complete the deal. Air Namibia's future has been cast in further doubt after the Namibian president declared the airline should be liquidated. The suggestion has in turn sparked objections from unions. Now, speaking during a nationwide address, the president said that recommended measures to cut routes, such as the key Frankfurt service, will not be welcomed. And finally, British Airways, EasyJet and Ryanair have all launched legal action against the government's controversial quarantine measures. The companies earlier reported they would join together to try to end the 14-day quarantine rule for international arrivals, which they say will deter travel and threaten more jobs in the sector. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we are heading into a quick break now, still coming up on the show. Tunisia's real GDP growth is projected to be negative this year. And Ugandans clear the air with eco-friendly electric bikes.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay, we'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Uche Okoronkwo. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Africa. Well, let's head to Tunisia now. The country's 2020 real GDP growth is projected to be negative at negative 2.5%, but that's before it will pick up to 2.5% next year. That is according to a new report published by the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. Tunisia will be held back this year by the implications of COVID-19 containment measures. That's both domestic and those applied in its main trading partners across Europe. With more on this, here's CGTN's Adnan Shaushi.
According to the report, supply chains for the textile and clothing and car parts industries will be affected. In addition, the unprecedented crisis in the tourism and transportation sectors will affect Tunisia's GDP. Moreover, the contraction in agriculture and a decline in global foreign direct investment flows will hold back the economy this year.
We are fully aware of the situation. The world's most powerful economies are expected to shrink. The GDP is expected to be negative due to domestic and international crisis. This year as well as next year will be very difficult. The projections are alarming, but we should not despair.
Projections are more dire according to the latest report by the World Bank, which says GDP growth is expected to contract by more than 4% in 2020 as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Washington-based lender recently released a report on the effect of the coronavirus pandemic on the global economic outlook.
The Central Bank of Tunisia has confirmed the World Bank's expectations. Negative 4.3% is the projected growth as a result of the pandemic. Tunisia's economy will shrink and cause serious economic and social repercussions.
But experts assert that the national economy has benefited from lower global oil prices.
The pandemic has a negative impact, but there are also some positive indicators. The price of a barrel of crude oil has plunged. The cost of subsidized energy is cheaper. The country's foreign exchange reserves are full.
Experts assert that preliminary estimates of the COVID-19 crisis repercussions prove the need to allocate an additional envelope of around $1.8 billion to the state budget. The COVID-19 crisis will have long-term socio-economic impacts on the country, including a drop in growth in 2020 and in fiscal resources of $1.6 billion. Prime Minister Laissez Farfer has declared that his government has taken into consideration several proposals from senior economists in order to deal with the economic impact of the pandemic. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Meanwhile, Zimbabwean President Emerson Mnangagwa has welcomed China's second donation of medical supplies. These supplies are expected to help Zimbabwe deal with the coronavirus pandemic. China has now donated more than 700,000 face masks, about 21,000 testing kits, and 100,000 pieces of personal protective equipment to the country.
It's the second batch of medical supplies from the Chinese government to Zimbabwe. It includes 165,000 surgical masks and over 25,000 pieces of personal protective equipment. The first batch of medical supplies was received in April.
On behalf of the government and people of Zimbabwe, and indeed on my own behalf, I express my gratitude to His Excellency Xi Jinping, President of the People's Republic of China, for the assistance that he continues to give to our country, Zimbabwe. This is a clear demonstration of the comprehensive strategic partnership relationship between the two countries, Zimbabwe and the People's Republic of China. This support and the collaboration continues to have a tremendous impact on Zimbabwe's efforts to fight the pandemic and ensure that all our frontline workers have adequate protection in the course of their duties.
The donation ceremony was held at State House in the capital, Harare.
Let me conclude by reiterating our profound gratitude for the continued support from His Excellency and brother, President Xi Jinping, and the people and government of the People's Republic of China. And I wish that you convey our gratitude to His Excellency, the President Xi Jinping.
This donation is a testament to our time-tested friendship. With the Chinese government taking the lead, the Chinese military, business, and individuals are all stepping up, reaching out a helping hand to local governments, hospitals, schools, and homeless in Zimbabwe.
The Chinese ambassador to Zimbabwe says it will continue to support and provide assistance to Zimbabwe as it battles COVID-19.
This year marks the 40th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between our two countries. In the past 40 years, in solidarity, we won freedom. In solidarity, we defended justice and democracy in international relations. In solidarity, we stood strong in difficult times. And in solidarity, we safeguarded the achievements of national independence and national sovereignty and territorial integrity. So brothers and sisters, let's brave the challenge ahead together. At the end of the tunnel is a bright future for our decades-old friendship and the well-being of our people.
Last month, China sent 12 medical experts to Zimbabwe for a 2-week program. The team shared the experience with their counterparts in Zimbabwe and provided prevention and treatment guidance. Chamwono, CGTN.
Meanwhile, in Uganda, air pollution from Kampala's congested traffic has been a long-standing problem. A coronavirus lockdown has significantly reduced pollution levels, and of course there's been a push to keep it that way. That's why 2 Ugandan innovators are now hoping to make motorbikes go electric, as Leon Senyange reports from Kampala.
In the suburbs of Kampala, a motorbike taxi driver powers his way through the streets, just as many others do daily. With one main difference, his electric bike is quieter and cleaner and costs him a lot less to maintain.
I got this bike because I don't have to spend much with mechanics like we usually do. Besides, it's a unique bike.
It takes about 2 hours to fully charge the bike's batteries. The innovators of this particular model are hoping they catch on.
The main difference between an electric bike and the petrol bike is, of course, electricity and petrol. Now, what does that mean for someone who rides a bike business-wise? The petrol drivetrain, the fuel powertrain, has a lot of moving parts. Piston rings, seals, gaskets. You need to lube all those parts. It's a lot of maintenance. Now, the electric drivetrain is virtually maintenance-free.
The e-bike can cover about 70 kilometers on a full charge, and cleaner motorbike taxis could transform the city's air quality.
We have very bad air quality in Kampala, and at the same time those people riding those bodas have also very little income because all their money goes on fuel, oil, maintenance. So we think we have to change something here. We all agree that in the next 10 or 20 years the world will be electric or roll electric.
The price tag on one of these bikes is $1,500. More than 20 electronic-powered motorbikes have been developed here and are already in use. There are also plans to make electric-powered cars. The company wants to transform from 2 to 4 wheels, but it's still a work in progress.
If you look at this axle, this is an axle of a small car popular in Africa. African seed is called Vitz. So we just adapted it, you know, we have the motor hubs here, we have the batteries. So in this case, you will have 2 batteries because you just need a much more bigger capacity, you know. It will go up to buses and things like that.
Uganda currently runs 2 electric-powered buses. That could be the future of commuting around town. For now, the e-bike is likely to help many like Chiza go a long way without spending too much. Leon Senyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
You are watching Global Business Africa, and coming up after this short break, the UK economy shrinks by a record 20% in April. And Brussels lays out a plan to reopen EU's borders.
No one again, he can hold in guns. Machine guns from police forces towards the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
Thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Just about 1:30, let's recap today's top headlines. Africa continues to record high numbers of COVID-19 recoveries, which currently stand at over 97,000. Now, nearly 6,000 people have died from the infectious disease on the continent. While Africa's cases account for less than 3% of the global total, the World Health Organization is warning that infections are accelerating. And France has launched a coalition of West African and European allies to fight militants in the Sahel region. More than 40 defense and foreign ministers have endorsed the revamped coalition that was first announced in January. France has deployed thousands of its soldiers in the Sahel since 2013. It now has over 5,000 troops there, aiming to combat Islamist insurgencies. And finally, China is rejecting a British report that criticizes a planned national security law for Hong Kong. Britain's Foreign Office says the legislation breaks the one country, two system framework that guarantees Hong Kong's autonomy and its residents' freedoms. Now, the Hong Kong government, however, calls that inaccurate and biased. It insists Hong Kong will keep its autonomy and that the new law is aimed at a small number of people for secession, subversion, as well as terrorism. That's a recap of today's top headlines. While official reports show that Britain's GDP in April saw the sharpest monthly decline ever, Finance Minister Rishi Sunak says the economy shrank by over 20%. The UK was under lockdown the entire month. Sunak says government measures, including tax cuts, have given the economy the best chance to recover after it reopens. Now, the country's outbreak is the second deadliest in the world, with the fifth highest number of cases. Meanwhile, Brussels has laid out plans to slowly reopen Europe's borders, both to European citizens and, of course, the wider world. The borders have been closed since mid-March, and lifting travel restrictions could give the bloc's tourism sector a major boost. But as Tony Waterman explains from Brussels, not everyone is welcome.
The European Commission issued a list of recommendations for lifting border restrictions in Europe just in time for the normally busy summer season. It's strongly encouraging member states to remove internal restrictions on Monday, June 15th, and then to grant entry to citizens from non-EU countries from July 1st. But there is a catch. The Commission isn't inviting everyone. It said that it's going to work with member states to draw up a list of approved countries based on a few criteria. Infection rates are going to be closely scrutinized. Containment measures will have to be in place, and the coronavirus situation in those non-EU countries needs to be on par or better than the situation in Europe. EU citizens must also be allowed to travel there. This throws into question how quickly Europe's tourism sector, which accounts for 10% of the GDP, can recover from months of lockdowns. It's also unclear, for example, whether U.S. citizens will be allowed in. Nearly 18 million Americans visited Europe in 2018, so this could put a big dent in the bloc's recovery.
This list, of course, hopefully can be longer and longer and longer, and have more and more countries on it. but that has to be taken gradually. The most important thing is to the protection of public health in the This is the most important priority for the EU and its member states.
But the recommendations from Brussels are just that, recommendations. Each member state decides for itself when, how, and to whom to reopen its borders. And most countries have already outlined their plans. Italy, Estonia, and Austria, for example, opened their borders to varying degrees earlier this month, while Spain and Portugal say that they will open later in June. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Brussels.
Now, in Japan, researchers are saying that COVID-19 is responsible for even more job losses than the 2008 financial crisis. Back in March, unemployment in the world's third largest economy hit a one-year high. Officials say the situation now has gotten worse, with those who've lost their jobs finding it hard to get new ones. Here's CGTN's Grace Lee with more from Tokyo.
It's been 2 weeks since Japan lifted its state of emergency. Little by little, Tokyo's streets are coming back to life, and the morning commute is starting to get busy again. But COVID-19 has already left its mark on Japan's job market, with economists from a university research institute saying it may cost more than 3 million people their jobs. Ikuya Yamada is one of them.
The rent is very high in Tokyo, so, every month my saving is getting lower and lower, and I'm a little bit worried.
She was supposed to start a new job in April at a music company.
They asked me to wait for a few weeks. So I waited a few weeks, but the situation didn't change. So they said, okay, yes, I'm sorry, this contract is canceled.
However, Yamada was able to get compensated for the time she was asked to wait, at least in part. According to Japan's labor laws, employers are required to pay at least 60% of their workers' pay during a leave of absence if it's requested from the employer's side. Since Japan's state of emergency didn't have any hard policies about shutting down businesses, that's meant employers were still on the hook for their workers' wages. Some businesses have simply refused to pay their workers.
I was supposed to start on May 1st. Because of Corona, it was pushed down to maybe after Golden Week.
Hiroshi Kikushima had found a new job as a language teacher, but when the pandemic hit, the company told him to stay at home and wait, without compensation.
So I talked to them, I was like, there's this article number 26 for the labor law that is supposed to cover at least 60% of our would-be salaries, so we can still pay our bills and food and stuff. And they told me, no, they're not going to pay for those.
Japan's general union says cases like Kikushima's have been common, with companies shirking the blame on the pandemic.
We discussed lots with the Labor Bureau here in Osaka, and even then, their position was very clear. No, this is still voluntary. The government has not locked down anybody. The government cannot close a business. So any loss of business or any, that you close your company, well, that's up to you.
Many of those workers have yet to be compensated. Both Kikushima and Yamada are actively looking for jobs. But with 3 million other people set to be out of work because of COVID-19, competition is fierce, and the pandemic isn't quite over yet. Grace Lee, CGTN, Tokyo.
Now, the ongoing coronavirus chaos is not only wreaking immense misery and havoc across the globe, it is also causing a worrying trend with grave environmental implications. Here's CGTN's Tony Chang with a look at how a spike in demand for protective equipment, takeaway packaging and single-use bottles is now leading to a surge in plastic waste.
It's a long way from the Barcelona Olympics, where Amara competed for Thailand as a windsurfer. Now she paddles the waterways of Pattaya on a longboard, picking out plastic waste. It's a dirty job, but someone has to do it. But over the past few months, the steady flow of plastic waste has become a tsunami.
I worry that after COVID-19, I can imagine the sea will be filled with trash just like last year and the year before. As long as we humans don't change our behavior or we still lack awareness, even if the virus stays with us for the next 10 years, we won't be able to conserve nature.
The reason for the flood of plastic waste is this: takeaway food packaging. Since the lockdown in March, the use of online food delivery services has exploded in Thailand, as it has in many other parts of the world. Although the use of plastic bags and packaging had been banned in many shops and supermarkets, the ban was quickly forgotten. That's a huge frustration for the environmental groups that have been campaigning hard to reduce plastic waste and pollution.
Plastic waste increasing approximately 62%. When COVID-19 came, start in February, in March and April, the amount of plastic usage is increasing, especially from food delivery.
And there's another source of plastic waste related to the COVID-19 outbreak. Most of the PPE, protective clothing worn to shield health workers, is disposable. Hospitals have strict procedures for disposal, but a significant amount is still escaping. While most medical waste is disposed of in hospitals, in specialist incinerators, a lot of PPE and single-use plastics, like these face masks down here, are disposed of in general waste and allowed to float off into the environment where they remain highly infectious. And the end result is scenes like this, a plastic-infested beach close to the Indonesian island of Bali. Asia produces more than 60% of the plastic pollution in the world's oceans. The coronavirus crisis looks likely to make that even worse. Tony Cheng, CGTN, Bangkok.
Well, let's shift focus now and take a look at commodity markets today. Oil prices edging higher today, but they were on track for their first weekly fall in about 7 weeks. Of course, a spike in coronavirus cases reported has raised the prospect of a second wave hitting demand going forward. That, of course, has brought that rally in oil prices to a halt. Meanwhile, gold prices dipping today as well, but on the back of a stronger dollar. However, those new concerns around coronavirus cases and, of course, the economic recovery did lend some support to prices today. The metal was on track for its first weekly rise in about 4 weeks. Well, let's take a short break now. Still to come. A taste of Africa is tickling taste buds across Australia. And Nollywood is back in the game, weeks after a nationwide lockdown in Nigeria.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys. The greatest sights. The greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
across Africa, we're already seeing the harsh impact that the coronavirus pandemic has had on the continent. Many have lost their jobs and businesses are struggling to survive. It is now hoped that the Africa Continental Free Trade Area will provide the best way out of this problem. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala with more.
Come post-COVID-19, Africa is banking on its Continental Free Trade Area. Studies show that the free trade area has the potential to increase growth, raise welfare, and stimulate industrial development on the continent.
African countries now have to engage in value-adding activities for their commodities, and they'll find a large market in the African Continental Free Trade Area of 1.2 billion people, with a young population, which offers a very huge consumer base. So this is how we see the African Continental Free Trade Area. And immediately the opportunities arise. Let's reignite our unit through the African Continental Free Trade Area so that we facilitate the emergence of trade across Africa using this platform. That's the only way of ensuring that we regenerate our economies faster.
Already, due to the impact of COVID-19, hundreds of thousands of jobs could be lost across the continent. But the current reality is also providing opportunities for African countries. Accelerated intra-regional trade is one of them.
Another aspect that is emerging is that as a result of lockdowns, a lot of young entrepreneurs are coming across Africa to increase their participation in e-commerce. Because if you look around a lot of African countries, the supermarkets are there. They are being sanitized every day. But few people have the courage to go there because they don't want to be infected. So the only way to deliver products to the people is through e-commerce. And when you deliver, then the people who are receiving the products can sanitize those products. So there's an opportunity for e-commerce.
The African Union is urging African states to ease trade restrictions and barriers for the Continental Free Trade Area to deliver better for member states. The good news is the Africa Centers for Disease Control has rolled out a safe economy unlocking strategy for countries.
We've issued guidelines for countries on how to unlock the systems and economy in a stepwise manner, but that has to be backed by an aggressive and bold measures to implement PAC, which is underpinned by three areas: ability to scale up testing, ability to deploy large number of foot soldiers so that they can conduct contact tracing, and preparing healthcare facilities to treat and take care of large number of patients.
The African Continental Free Trade Area, launched 2 years ago at the African Union Summit in Kigali, Rwanda, was launched to be implemented from 1st July 2020. But this has been postponed until 2021 because of the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. Experts say, however mouth-watering the Africa Free Trade Area plans look on paper, successful implementation is still key. Group Data CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Now, an Adelaide community garden started by a group of African refugees has become so popular that its produce is being sought in other states around Australia. The community farms maize, which is of course a main staple for over 300 million Africans. Australia normally grows sweet corn, but the Adelaide community garden is now hoping to expand its production as the nation embraces the taste of maize. Tulisha Balala has more on that story.
Oh, wow, the maize are ready here.
Adelaide is a world away from the African farms where maize is traditionally grown. But after Mohamed Yotham fled Burundi as a refugee, he was determined to be able to eat his favorite food in his new home in Australia.
And one of the main food which you are eating almost every day was maize flour.
4 years ago, the amazing Northern Multicultural Service started this community garden to grow produce used in African and Asian cooking.
We have a very good response, not only from African communities, but even from Middle East and from Asia. And now we are teaching even Aussie to use the maize, and they like it. That we brought something which bring a sense of optimism. And this garden has been a center of that.
But amid the COVID-19 pandemic, the community space is more than just a patch of fertile soil. For those who've lost their jobs, they say it's been a source of comfort.
When I see the garden, it reminds me home ground, so I feel I'm home.
Another way of a sense of belonging for people like me who came from another country.
Demand for the maize has quickly outstripped supply, with requests even coming from other states. The community garden has just bought a strip of land across the road to plant more maize. And as the garden continues to grow, they hope one day there'll be enough maize in Australia to produce flour. Thuli Shabalala, CGTN.
And let's head to Ghana now, where social and religious gatherings of up to 100 people are now allowed, with hotels and restaurants operating under new safety measures. However, bars, pubs and nightclubs still remain firmly shut. From Accra, here's CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai exploring how bartenders are struggling to make up for lost tips.
Since the outbreak of the coronavirus in Ghana, David Nyamiche's job as a bartender has been badly hit.
It's been very, very frustrating because no one saw this coming, as in the length of how it will last for.
The government has relaxed restrictions after 3 months of lockdown, but bars, nightclubs and pubs are still not allowed to open. The COVID-19 pandemic is threatening the livelihoods of many Ghanaian youth employed within the hospitality industry.
We are not generating any revenue for us to be able to pay our partners, our suppliers, even salaries enough and stuff like that. So it's been a big issue.
Ghana has not flattened the curve on its COVID-19 infections, but the government says it had to ease the lockdown restrictions to reduce its impact on the economy. But some sectors have yet to bounce back.
The throbbing heart of Accra's nightlife along Osu Oxford Street behind me would normally be buzzing on a Friday night. But with the closure of bars and pubs due to the coronavirus pandemic, this area is now very quiet.
And those within the hospitality industry are finding it difficult adjusting to these tough times.
Over 280 bartenders are currently in an association. Most of them have been laid off with no pay. And most of them are working in these big industries and big hotels. I believe they should have also given us the opportunity to operate with a laid-down procedure, with a social distancing, and also put in measures that might also not spread the disease.
Experts say business owners may have to make some critical decisions, as it's uncertain when the pandemic will be over.
Some businesses may not survive. Others who will survive will have to take a hard decision as to having a frank conversation with their staff. Do we continue to pay you at the levels that were set for you, or we reduce it to cover and elicit cost savings and maintain our business so that we can survive post-COVID enough to guarantee you a job? So there's got to be some sacrifices made on both parts.
These bartenders are afraid of losing their jobs and want the government to consider relaxing restrictions on their business. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Now, Nigeria's film industry is slowly creeping back to work weeks after the coronavirus lockdown thwarted production schedules. Now, Nollywood, as it's well known around the globe, churns out movies and TV shows at a rate second only to India's Bollywood. However, as CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam now reports, dwindling revenues as well as social distancing rules are leading to a cut in casts and crew.
The cameras are rolling again on the set of the popular series Halita, as Nigeria restarts its entertainment industry after the COVID-19 lockdown. The suspense-filled story on social issues, trafficking and justice has garnered viewers across Africa. For lead actor Mofe Duncan, it's a delight to be back at work.
The fact that I'm back on set is great because, one thing, it's good to see people. It's good to learn that people survived the virus, or a lot of us who have come back are still alive and are healthy and things like that. Also, it's what I love doing. I love being in front of the camera. You know, I think that a lot of us have suppressed our creativity a lot because we've not been able to express ourselves.
Nollywood is rated the second largest employer in Nigeria, with more than 1 million people working in the industry. The industry produces an average 50 movies weekly, second only to India's Bollywood. But all of that is changing as producers cut back on costs and crews.
Social distancing thing is pretty much the reason why you have to cut down. I give an example. We have a 70-man crew that's been cut down to 12.
Not just that, operations are different now as producers ensure they adhere to other safety guidelines.
We have the, the temperature reader, where we get to make sure that everybody walking in here is within the compliant temperature.
Nollywood movies have gained even more global traction, featuring on digital platforms like Netflix. The industry generates an average $590 million annually. That represents 0.21% of the country's GDP. Many worry that future gains could be hampered by the coronavirus outbreak. But this could also be an opportunity, forcing industry players to innovate when it comes to producing content. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, before we go, here's a quick look at Africa's currencies today. Kenya's shilling was stronger on the back of inflows from diaspora remittances. South Africa's rand gained in early trade after tumbling more than 3% in the previous session. That's on growing doubts over a quick recovery from the coronavirus pandemic, both globally and at home. Well, that is it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen, and you can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.